What's up, Titans? Welcome back to the Daily Titan podcast. I'm Ruben Montoya, your managing editor.
And I'm Bryan Jimenez, your news editor.
And we're your DT Pod guest hosts. Today we're covering volume 116, issue 10 of the Daily Titan newspaper, The Voter Guide, including stories about local House of Representative races, ballot propositions 4 and 33, and Fullerton City Council elections in District 2 and 4.
Starting off with California's 46th Congressional District election, incumbent Lou Correa is facing Republican David Pan. The 46th district constitutes the cities of Santa Ana, Anaheim, parts of South Fullerton, Orange, and Stanton. And there are rumblings in the town that you interviewed both of these candidates.
Yeah, so I interviewed Correa at his office in Santa Ana, and then I interviewed Pan at a Republican Club of North Orange County event. It was at a Sizzler in Fullerton.
And could you talk a little bit about their policy platforms?
Of course. So Correa, he's very strong on immigration reform. Pan, on the other hand, he's a very hard border security guy. So on that issue, that is Correa's number one issue, I would say, because he frequently just circled back to that issue. He's very strong on immigration reform in that he's sort of against the mainstream on the Democratic Party's position on that. He pushes harder for that than the party does at the moment, I would say. And he talks about his own lived experience. You know, he told me that he was born in the United States, but he moved back to Mexico when he was young, and then he moved back to the United States when he was 7 or 8, around there. And he told me about his experience sort of learning English, learning how to just adapt into this, into society when, he was essentially an immigrant, though, obviously his citizen status was different. But nonetheless, one thing he frequently mentioned was the undocumented workers, how important they are for the economy, and that it's not necessarily an issue about the immigrants themselves. It's an issue of the economy. One of the quotes in the story, he says that who are the farm workers? They're undocumented. Who are the meat packing workers? They're undocumented. And this is something that I would say is his top priority. On the economy, Pan is he's a, quote, market-based solutions sort of advocate. On the other hand, Correa, he emphasizes supporting business through, legislation. He mentioned that he has these relationships with firms like Google and Amazon, and how important that is to supporting California and supporting young workers there. So they offer differing positions there. I think Pan mentioned he wasn't necessarily he said he wasn't a free market absolutist, but he does believe that we should let the market sort of take us down a certain path, and that will be, in his opinion, the best path. While Correa, he thinks supporting businesses through government is necessary sometimes. And then lastly, on the issue of abortion, Correa he's pro-choice, and Pan is pro-life, if that's how you want to frame it. So Correa, he mentioned that he was a Catholic, that he he has his personal beliefs, but he doesn't believe that the government should be infringing on people's day-to-day personal decisions, as he described it. And yeah, he also mentioned that he has constituents to represent. So like I said, he said he was a Catholic, but that's his position, and he told me that he was pro-choice. On the other hand, Pan, well, he didn't say directly he was necessarily pro-life. He mentioned that he did support the decision to overrule Roe v. Wade, and that there was that this should be a decision that should be left up to these states to decide.
Mm-hmm. And what are your biggest takeaways from their policy positions?
I would describe them both as sort of mainstream, but with one or two different positions. So Correa, as I mentioned, he's definitely I would describe apart from the mainstream on immigration from your typical Democrat. And Pan, interestingly, is different from Republicans in that he advocates for this universal basic income proposal that I would say is certainly just like unexpected from a Republican candidate. Although the thing with his proposal is that's different from those in the past is that he wants to phase out Social Security, Medicare, and the whole welfare and entitlement system and replace it with a $16,000 universal basic income for everyone over the age of 21. And that's different from like sort of past proposals from Andrew Yang, which he mentioned, and he noted that it was more so under Yang's proposal was a sort of added tax on top of the already existing like social security, Medicare systems and all of that.
Mm-hmm. And to close off this race, who does current polling favor?
So Pan faces a really uphill battle, and Correa is definitely very strongly favored. They actually faced each other in the primary in the spring, and Correa won by over 20 points. So Correa has a huge advantage in that point. Then they've already seen each other in an election. And then on top of that, the electorate consists of more Democrats than Republicans. And I would also argue Correa has an advantage with demographics as the district includes Anaheim and Santa Ana, as we mentioned. Those cities have more predominantly Hispanic populations. And Pan would not only have to win over an electorate of more Democrats, he'd also have to make a case to Hispanic voters who I would say are Correa's done a decent job at sort of courting through his immigration policies.
You also wrote a story on the 45th Congressional District election. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in the 45th District, which covers North Fullerton, including CSUF's campus, parts of Garden Grove, La Palma, Placentia, and Westminster, the incumbent Republican Michelle Steele is facing Derek Tran. And I should also note one thing about this district that is very important is that it is one of the few in the entire country that is majority Asian, and particularly it includes Little Saigon, which is the largest Vietnamese enclave outside of Vietnam. So Michelle Steele is the incumbent. She's a Korean American, and Derek Tran is the son of Vietnamese refugees. And it's been a very interesting race because it's very important on the national stage. It's sort of, they describe it as a like swing district. It could determine who has control of the House of Representatives in the next session. But policy has really been blurred by just a bunch of personal attacks. So on the policy, from what I was able to gather, Steele emphasizes that she wants to fight against, quote, socialist policies. And Tran says that he's very pro-worker. So he cites his experience as an attorney to push that message. But that kind of, it ties in together to where the election sort of devolves into just a bunch of personal attacks and not actually debating the policy. So, Steele's pushing that message of being against socialist policies. That's been a key like inflection point. Both of the candidates have sort of made their own allegations against each other and supposed communist sympathies. Steele pushed out some flyers that depicted Tran with a hammer and sickle behind him and sitting next to Mao Zedong, while Derek Tran has made the claim that Steele's husband has been getting money through from the Chinese Communist Party. So it's sort of really devolved into that. But another major thing I will say on the policy front is that abortion has also been another major inflection point in this race, as Michelle Steele, she co-sponsored a piece of legislation earlier this year called the Life at Conception Act, which she eventually revoked her co-sponsoring of. And in the bill, it says that they want to, quote, implement equal protection for the right to life of each born and preborn human person. So Tran released some attack ads calling her out on that. And also just kind of putting this label on her as, quote, MAGA Steele. Yeah, so it's been a lot of tit for tat, a lot of just sort of bickering. But it's very interesting because I wasn't able to interview these candidates, unfortunately. But nonetheless, like this race is hugely important. It covers our campus, and it could shape up who has control of the House of Representatives, which is very important for Congress, arguably more so than the Senate is.
What's up, Titans? It's Kabir, your assistant lifestyle editor and typical co-host of this podcast. I'm with
Jaden Lovelady, the lifestyle editor and other co-host of the podcast.
We hope you didn't miss us too much this week. The Daily Titan's covering the election on Tuesday, November 5th, so keep an eye out for all of that coverage.
And if you missed the lifestyle and opinion stories, don't worry, they're online.
Same with sports. You can check it out at dailytitan.com. Don't miss us too much. We'll catch you guys next week.
See you next week.
Moving on to the state propositions presented to voters this election cycle, we're going to start with Proposition 4, which authorizes $10 billion in climate bonds for the state. So these bonds would be paid at a rate of $400 million a year for over 40 years, which is one of the main reasons that it's opposed by organizations such as the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, which argues that these costs are levied onto average taxpayers. It's also been opposed by State Senator Bryan Jones in a opinion piece he wrote in Cal Matters. However, State Senator Ben Allen, who co-authored the legislation, made the point that essentially the state will either have to pay for climate change now or it'll have to pay for it later. And a state assessment actually found that climate change related damage could cost the state up to $113 million by 2050. Meanwhile, a FEMA study found that the prop could save the state up to $60 million. So currently the proposition has raised over $10 million in support and is backed by CAL FIRE firefighters, the UCLA of SoCal, and the California Labor Federation, among others. And so the main thing that the proposition does is it mitigates climate change in the various ways that it impacts the state. The main ways being rising sea levels, wildfires, droughts, floods. A significant chunk of the money is appropriated towards water conservation. As we're seeing in the state, that's going to be one of the biggest issues that we face as higher and higher heats hit the region. It's going to be more difficult. So most of the money is going to go towards that, preserving wildlife, preserving ecosystems, preserving biodiversity. And some polling from Cal Matters found that 60% of voters supported the measure, which gives it quite good odds this election cycle.
On to Prop 33. So this ballot proposition is essentially a referendum on Costa-Hawkins, which is a state law which limits what types of properties can be regulated by rent control laws. Under this law, properties constructed after 1995 and single-family homes are unable to be rent controlled. As you may already know, housing in California is very expensive. In my article, I mentioned that a report by DocSo, a bill-paying service, says that Californians pay an average of more than $1,900 a month in rent. I spoke with people on both sides of this issue, and on the supporting side, I spoke with the representative from Tenants Together named Shanti Singh. She basically framed her position as essentially a return of powers to local municipalities in enacting rent controls, should they want to or not. On the other side, I spoke with Assistant Professor of Finance here at CSUF, Desen Lin. He said that he believes this legislation could be short-sighted and possibly lead to a housing price increase in the future. As far as funding goes, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation has spent more than $47 million, while the California Apartment Association and the California Association of Realtors have spent a combined total of over $100 million. It should also be noted that this ballot measure is once again a face-off between the previously mentioned AIDS Healthcare Foundation and the California Apartment Association. On this issue, they have debated separate ballot measures twice before and have been on opposing sides of various other ballot measures. On to District 4. One notable story to come out of this election was that of Scott Markowitz, one of the 4 candidates on the ballot. Earlier this month, he was charged with 2 felony counts for falsifying nomination paperwork and record of forged or false instrument. That was according to a press release released by the Orange County District Attorney's Office, which I reported on in a story earlier this month as well. However, according to an OC Register article, he pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor count on October 21st. Nonetheless, Markowitz will be unable to be elected due to him being charged for the previously mentioned offenses. If he were to win the election, they would have to run a special election in the city of Fullerton for District 4. Bryan, could you tell me a little more about these other candidates on the ballot?
Yeah, so to start off, there's a bit of a vacuum in this race. The reason for so many candidates is because Bruce Whitaker, the current representative, is terming out. So aside from Markowitz, the other candidates are Vivian Kitty Jamiro, Jamie Valencia, and Linda Whitaker. This is one of the more interesting races because with these 3 candidates, you have one representing one wing of the current coalition, another representing the other, and a third sort of independent candidate. So it's really interesting to see the outcome of this election and how it balances out that council representation. Linda Whitaker is endorsed by Mayor Dunlap, the Orange County Republican Party. And aside from her, Jamiro is endorsed by the Orange County Democrats, Assembly Member Sharon Quicksilva, State Senator Josh Newman, State Senator Lou Correa, and the other council members Zara and Charles, further highlighting that divide. Valencia, on the other hand, does not have these significant endorsements from relevant figures. However, she has served she served 2 years on the Fullerton Infrastructure and Natural Resources Advisory Committee and represents the city in the Orange County Transportation Authority Citizens Advisory Committee, which is a lot of jargon, but is to say that she is relevant in that she serves on the infrastructure side, which is a huge point for this election for all candidates, because even in this race and really all of them across Fullerton, one of the biggest points is always going to be, roads being repaired and general infrastructure. And we're also seeing large attention towards police and firefighter bolstering those services. And that's it for this week's special episode of the DT Pod. Be sure to pick up a copy of the Daily Titan on campus or check us out at dailytitan.com to read the articles mentioned. Thank you all for listening, and if you like us, we love you.
A special thanks to our executive producers Isaiah Mallari and Emily Wilson, our producer Luis Vizcaino, and assistant producers Raniel Santos and Michelle King. Outro music by Bijan Shustrijade. Thank you all for listening and tune in next week.